The collapse. The ruin had been silent for thousands of years, but on this day the silence broke. The human mechanic moved carefully through the ancient corridors. His lamp threw weak light on the broken walls, showing strange carvings and forgotten doors. Beside him walked the alien girl, her silver skin shining in the glow, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. She was young, not a fighter, not a soldier. She had only come because her people believed these ruins hid something important, something powerful. The air was heavy with dust, and every step made small rocks fall from the ceiling. The human glanced up again and again, uneasy. He had worked in collapsed tunnels before, fixing machines trapped under rubble, but this place felt different. It was alive in its silence, waiting. Then it happened. A deep rumble shook the ground. The walls groaned and the floor cracked beneath their feet. The alien girl gasped, reaching out to steady herself, but the shaking grew worse. Dust poured from above like rain. The human shouted, "Run!" They sprinted, but the corridor split open in front of them. The stones gave way, and both of them fell through the darkness. The fall was short, but the landing was hard. The human hit the ground with a thud, the air forced from his lungs. Pain shot through his arm, but he forced himself up. His lamp, cracked but still glowing, lit the chamber around them. The ruin had collapsed into itself, sealing them inside. And then he heard it. A cry. The alien girl lay a few feet away, her leg pinned under a massive stone block. She tried to move, but the rock was too heavy. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, her voice shaking. I can't move." The human rushed to her side, his heart racing. He pushed at the stone with all his strength. His muscles burned, but it did not budge. He tried again, putting his shoulder against it, gritting his teeth. Still nothing. The ceiling above them groaned again. More dust fell. Another section of wall cracked loudly in the distance. Time was running out. "Don't move," he said quickly, trying to hide his panic. "I'll get you out." Her face was pale, her breath shallow. She nodded, but her eyes were full of fear. He searched the room for anything he could use. Broken beams, shattered stone, scraps of old metal. Nothing strong enough to make a lever, nothing that could lift a block this size. He knelt again beside her, his hands trembling as he tried once more. The stone shifted only a little, and she screamed in pain. He stopped at once, guilt cutting through him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She closed her eyes, breathing hard, whispering back, It's not your fault." Silence followed. Only the sound of falling dust and their own breaths filled the air. The human's mind raced. The exits were sealed. The chamber was tight, with no way out he could see. His lamp flickered weakly, the light dimming. If it died, they would be left in complete darkness. The girl spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. "You can leave me. Save yourself." The human froze, anger flashing in his eyes. "No," he said firmly. "I don't leave anyone behind." For a moment their eyes met in the half-light. She saw the fire in him, the stubbornness of a human who would fight against impossible odds. He tried again, searching the cracks around the stone, pushing, pulling, clawing at the edges with his bare hands until his skin bled. But the rock refused to move. His breath grew heavy, his strength fading. The girl winced in pain, her hands clutching the dust-covered ground. Then, with trembling lips, she whispered something strange. There is another way." The human looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Her eyes shined with tears, but there was also courage in them. "My people, we can heal. Our bodies can regrow what is lost. If the limb is cut away, it will return." He stared at her, not understanding at first. Then the meaning hit him, and his stomach dropped. She was asking him to cut off her leg. The silence between them grew heavier than the stones around them. His hands shook as he looked at her pinned limb, then back at her face. She was serious, deadly serious. The human opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. His heart pounded. The ruins groaned again, another warning that time was running short. Her voice was weak now, but clear. "If you want me to live, You must do it. The lamp flickered again, shadows dancing across the chamber. The human clenched his fists, torn between horror and duty. The ruins were collapsing, the air was growing thinner, and he knew one truth. Soon he would have to decide. The impossible request. The silence inside the ruins grew heavy, broken only by the girl's shallow breaths and the faint crackling of falling dust. The human stared at her, his heart beating fast. Her words echoed in his mind again and again. Cut off my leg, it will grow back. It sounded impossible, unreal. To humans, a lost limb was forever. But her eyes were steady, filled with both pain and a strange calmness. She was not joking, she truly meant it. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling. You're in shock, he whispered. You don't know what you're saying. But the alien girl shook her head slowly. I do know. My kind. We can heal. Not quickly, not easily. But the flesh returns. The bone forms again. You must believe me. The human's throat went dry. He looked at the heavy block pinning her down. There was no way to move it, no tool strong enough to help. Her blood was already pooling under the stone, dark against the dust. Time was slipping. He's away. He pulled back, pressing his palms to his face. His whole life he had fixed machines, repaired broken engines, rescued ships from disaster. But this was different. Machines did not scream when you cut them. The girl reached out, her cold fingers brushing his arm. You said you would not leave me, she whispered. Then don't. Do this, and I will live. His chest tightened. You're asking me to hurt you, he said, his voice low. I'm asking you to save me. The ruins shook again, harder this time. Stones cracked and fell from the ceiling, slamming into the floor around them. The chamber groaned as if ready to bury them forever. He had no more time to think. The human took a shaky breath and pulled out the only tool he had, his survival knife. Its blade was not meant for this. It was meant for rope, for metal wires, for food. But now it would decide life or death. He looked at her again, hoping she would change her mind, hoping she would say no. But instead, she nodded once, her jaw tight, her eyes wet with silent tears. The human's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the blade. His heart thundered in his chest. I can't, he muttered. You can, she whispered back, because you are human. You do what must be done. Her words cut deeper than any blade. He swallowed hard, knelt at her trapped leg, and pressed the blade against her skin. She closed her eyes, her breathing fast but steady. For a long moment, the knife did not move. He couldn't force it. His mind screamed against it. This was wrong, cruel, inhuman. But then the ceiling groaned again, and a crack split across the chamber wall. Dust rained down. The ruins were about to crush them both. He had no choice. The human gritted his teeth and pressed down. The blade sliced, slow at first, then deeper. The girl's scream filled the chamber, raw and terrible, echoing through the stone walls. And the sound tore at his soul, but he forced his hand to keep moving. His vision blurred, but he didn't stop. Her hand clawed at the ground, her body shaking, but still she whispered between cries, Do it. Finish it. I will heal. Finally, with one last desperate push, the blade cut through. The girl's scream broke into silence, her body going limp against the dust. The human dropped the knife, his whole body trembling, his hands soaked in blood. For a moment he thought he had killed her. But then she opened her eyes, weak, pale, but alive. The stone block no longer pinned her. Her severed leg lay beside it, still bleeding, but the wound itself had already started to shift, flesh quivering as if alive, cells moving in strange patterns. He saw muscle threads knitting faintly at the edge. His breath caught. She was telling the truth. You see, she whispered weakly, her lips barely moving. It will return, but only because you trusted me. The human pressed a cloth against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. His hands were still shaking. He could not look at the severed limb without his stomach twisting. But he kept working, because he could not stop now. Her face was white with pain, sweat dripping down her forehead, yet she managed a small, broken smile. "No one else would have done this," she murmured. "Not a soldier, not a leader, only a human." He said nothing, his throat tight, his mind spinning. Another crash shook the ruins, louder than before. Stones fell around them, one barely missing his head. The whole chamber was falling apart. He lifted her carefully, ignoring the pain in his own arm, ignoring his trembling muscles. She was light, too light, and she clung weakly to his neck. The knife lay forgotten on the ground. The severed leg lay forgotten too. The only thing that mattered now was survival. The human staggered toward a dark tunnel at the far side of the chamber. He didn't know if it led out. He didn't know if it led deeper into death, but he knew one truth. He could not stop. Behind him, the chamber groaned one last time, then collapsed into dust and stone. They had seconds left, and he was carrying the weight of 2 lives. The blade in hand, the tunnel was narrow and filled with shadows, every step echoing with danger. The human staggered forward, carrying the alien girl in his arms. Her body was weak, her face pale, but her eyes stayed open, fixed on him. The sound of collapsing stone roared behind them, but ahead there was only darkness. His arm ached, his legs shook, but he refused to stop. Each breath burned in his chest. He felt the girl's blood soaking into his clothes, warm and heavy. He pressed harder against the wound, but blood still slipped through his fingers. The ruins groaned again, and he realized with dread they weren't safe yet. The ceiling above cracked in places, sharp rocks breaking free and falling like knives. He ducked, shielding her body with his own, the stones cutting into his back. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. The girl whispered faintly, her voice trembling, "You should have left me." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "Never." Her lips curved into the faintest smile before her eyes closed. Panic surged through him. "Stay awake!" he shouted, shaking her lightly. "Don't you dare leave me now!" Her eyelids fluttered open, but her voice was weak. "You're kind, always fighting, even when hope is gone." The words hit him harder than the falling stones. He didn't reply. He couldn't. His throat was too tight. At last the tunnel widened into a small chamber. He set her down gently against a wall, his chest heaving. He pulled out the knife again, the blade still stained with her blood. His hands trembled as he cleaned it on his sleeve. The act mechanical, but his mind couldn't let go of what he had just done. The knife felt heavier than any weapon he had ever held. It wasn't just steel, it was memory, pain, and choice. He stared at it, his reflection blurred in the blood. Then the sound came. A sharp hiss echoed through the chamber. The human froze, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't the sound of stone. It was alive. From the shadows, shapes moved. Thin, long-limbed creatures crawled out from cracks in the walls, their eyes glowing faintly. Ancient guardians of the ruins, perhaps, or scavengers that lived in the dark. Their bodies were twisted, insect-like, with sharp mandibles clicking in hunger. The human's blood ran cold. He had no gun, no armor, only the knife in his hand. The alien girl stirred weakly, her eyes opening just enough to see. Her voice was faint but urgent. They smell blood." The human glanced at her, then at the creatures creeping closer. There were 4, no, 6 of them. Their claws scraped against the stone as they circled. His grip tightened on the blade. He knew he couldn't run, not with her in this state, not with tunnels collapsing behind them. The largest of the creatures hissed louder, lunging forward. The human raised the knife, stepping between it and the girl. He shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber, a roar of defiance. The beast slashed at him. He dodged, barely, the claws cutting his sleeve open. With a surge of adrenaline, he drove the knife upward into its chest. The blade sank deep, warm fluid spraying across his hand. The creature shrieked, collapsing to the ground. The others hissed louder, their eyes glowing brighter. The human pulled the knife free, his chest heaving. He stood taller now, his eyes burning with determination. He would not fall. Not here. Not while she depended on him. One by one the creatures lunged. One claw tore across his arm, another slammed him against the wall. Pain exploded through his body, but he refused to let go of the knife. Every strike he gave was fueled not by anger, but by something deeper: desperation, duty, humanity. Behind him the girl whispered through her pay, "Human, don't die for me." But he barely heard her. His world had narrowed to the blade in his hand, the pounding of his heart, and the need to keep her safe. At last, with a final desperate strike, he drove the knife into the last creature's throat. Its screech echoed before silence returned, broken only by his ragged breaths. The chamber floor was littered with bodies. His arm bled, his ribs ached, but he still stood. The girl watched him with wide eyes, awe mixing with sorrow. She whispered softly, "You are not like others. You fight even when broken." He knelt beside her, his knife slipping from his hand at last. His chest heaved as he pressed his forehead against the cold wall. "I had no choice," he whispered. But deep inside, he knew it was a choice, and he had chosen her. The girl's eyes fluttered closed, but not before she whispered one more word, soft as a prayer. Humanity. The ruins groaned again above them, shaking dust loose. They had survived the Guardians, but the ruins themselves were still hungry. The human picked her up once more, his grip steady, his eyes sharp. The knife was back in his hand, its weight familiar now. It was no longer just a tool, it was his promise. And with every step into the unknown, he swore silently, he would not let her die. Escape through darkness. The human carried her deeper into the ruins, the weight of her body pressing against his arms, the knife still clutched tight in his hand. The chamber behind them was silent now, filled with the bodies of the creatures he had killed. But silence in these ruins was never safe. It was only the pause before the next threat. The tunnel ahead was narrow and uneven. Sharp rocks jutted out like teeth, cutting his arms as he squeezed through. The air grew heavier, thick with dust and the sour smell of old stone. His lamp flickered weakly, its glow too small against the vast. The darkness. The girl stirred faintly, her voice only a whisper. "How do you still move? You are bleeding." He forced a breath through clenched teeth. "Because stopping means dying, and I don't plan to die today." Her lips curved into the ghost of a smile, but she fell silent again, her head resting weakly against his chest. The human's muscles burned. Every step felt heavier, every breath sharper. His mind screamed for rest, but his will forced him forward. Each time he stumbled, he thought of her eyes when she asked him to cut her leg. The courage she showed, he would not betray that courage. Then the tunnel shook. A deep groan echoed through the ruins, followed by a thunderous crack. Ahead of him, the ceiling collapsed, sealing the path with a wall of stone. Dust filled the air, choking his lungs. He coughed violently, pulling his jacket over her face to shield her from the dust. When the air cleared, despair clawed at him. The path forward was gone. He lowered her carefully onto the ground and staggered to the rockfall. He pushed, pulled, slammed his shoulders against the stones. Nothing moved. The wall was too thick, too heavy. He cursed under his breath, his fists slamming against the cold stone. For a moment, hopelessness threatened to crush him. Trapped again, deeper this time. The girl opened her eyes, her voice soft but sharp as glass. "Look, higher." He froze, then followed her gaze. Above the rockfall, a narrow crack split the wall, a faint draft of air slipping through. Hope. But the crack was far above his reach, and too narrow to fit through without a fight. His muscles ached at the thought of climbing, but he had no choice. He tied the knife to his belt, adjusted his hold on her, and began to climb. The rocks cut into his hands, tearing his skin. Each pull felt impossible, but he kept moving inch by inch. The girl clung weakly to him, her breath shallow. He could feel her warmth fading against his chest. The crack widened just enough for him to push her through first. She whimpered as he lifted her, but she did not resist. With one final heave, he shoved her into the narrow passage. She slid forward, vanishing into the dark beyond. Then the wall shuddered again. The stones groaned, shifting under his weight. Dust poured from above. The crack was collapsing. His heart pounded. If he hesitated, if he faltered, the way out would vanish forever. Summoning the last of his strength, he dragged himself upward, forcing his shoulders and chest through the sharp opening. Rocks scraped his skin, blood streaking across his arms, but he didn't stop. He pulled, gasped, clawed until he tumbled through, falling onto the other side. For a moment he lay on the ground, gasping for air, his body screaming in pain. Then he heard her faint voice calling his name. He forced himself up. She was lying against the wall, her wound still bleeding but her eyes alive, waiting for him. He moved to her side, gripping her hand tightly. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. The tunnel here was different. The air was fresher, cooler. He could smell faint traces of plants, soil, life. The surface was close. But danger came first. From the shadows ahead, another sound echoed. Not the hiss of insects this time, but something heavier. A slow drag, like chains pulled across stone. The human tensed, raising his knife once more. His arms shook, his wounds burned, but his eyes blazed with determination. The girl squeezed his hand weakly. "You can't fight anymore. You'll break." He looked at her and shook his head. "If I break, I break, but not before you're safe." The sound grew louder, closer. Something huge moved in the dark ahead, its breath like the growl of an animal too ancient to name. The girl's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. She tried to speak, but no words came. The human stepped forward, placing himself between her and the shadows. His body was broken, his knife dull, but his spirit burned like fire. And as the darkness stirred, he whispered to himself, steady and unyielding, "No one touches her, not while I breathe." The air trembled with the weight of what was coming. The ruins were not finished with them yet. Light and revelation, the sound grew louder in the tunnel, shaking the walls as if something massive was dragging itself closer. The human stood tall, his knife raised, his breath ragged. His body screamed in pain, but his spirit refused to bend. Behind him, the alien girl lay weak but alive, her eyes locked on him with both fear and trust. The shadows shifted. From the dark emerged a monstrous figure, larger than any of the insect-like creatures he had fought before. Its body was armored in jagged stone-like plates, its eyes glowing red like burning coal. Each step cracked the ground, and its claws were long enough to tear through steel. The human's throat went dry, but he tightened his grip on the knife. Against such a beast he had no chance, yet he stepped forward anyway. The creature let out a roar that shook the tunnel. Dust rained from the ceiling, rocks split apart, and the girl gasped in terror. But the human didn't move back. "You want me?" he growled, his voice raw. "Then come and take me." The beast lunged. The human dodged, rolling across the rough ground, the claws smashing into stone where he had stood. He slashed upward with the knife, cutting across the creature's arm. The blade barely pierced its thick hide, but the cut was enough to make it roar again. The girl struggled to lift herself, shouting weakly, "Run! You can't win this!" But he ignored her. His bloodied hand gripped the knife tighter. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to survive long enough to give her a chance. The monster lunged again, faster this time. The human barely dodged, the claws grazing his ribs. Pain shot through him, but he refused to fall. He stabbed again, this time at the creature's glowing eye. The blade sank halfway, before snapping in two. The creature shrieked, stumbling back, its eye ruined. The human stared at the broken handle in his hand. His only weapon was gone. The tunnel shook again. Another rockfall cracked the ceiling. Light flickered through the cracks above, a faint beam of sunlight breaking into the darkness. Hope. The human's eyes widened. That was the way out, but the path was blocked by the monster. He turned to the girl, shouting, "When I move, crawl toward the light." Her eyes widened in horror. "No, you'll be killed." He smiled faintly, blood dripping from his lips. "Maybe, but if you live, it's worth it." Before she could protest, he charged. The beast roared and swung its claws. The human ducked under, slamming his shoulder into its chest. The impact threw him back, but it also staggered the monster. Rocks cracked beneath them. The tunnel trembled like it would collapse any second. The girl, tears streaming down her face, dragged herself toward the faint light. Every movement was agony, but she refused to stop. The monster turned toward her, sensing her weakness. The human roared, throwing himself onto its back. His bare hands clawed at its wound, forcing his fingers deep into the ruined eye socket. The creature shrieked and thrashed violently, slamming him against the walls, tearing his skin. Blood covered him, but he didn't let go. "Not her," he growled through clenched teeth. "You'll never touch her." With one final surge of strength, he shoved deeper. The beast let out a final scream before collapsing, its body shaking the ground as it fell. The human tumbled off, broken and gasping. His body wouldn't rise this time. He looked at the girl crawling toward the sunlight and felt peace. But she turned back, her eyes wide with terror. "No, don't you stop now." He tried to smile. "You'll be safe. That's enough." Then the tunnel above them gave way. A flood of sunlight poured through as stones crashed around them. The opening widened, showing blue sky and fresh air. The girl screamed, dragging herself back to him. With strength he didn't believe she still had, she pulled him toward the light. Her half-regrown legs shook with pain, but she didn't stop. Stone by stone, she dragged him until both of them tumbled into the sunlight. The air outside was fresh, cool, alive. The human lay on his back, staring at the endless sky. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but he was alive. The girl collapsed beside him, looking at her slowly healing leg. The flesh was already forming again, proof of her strange gift. She turned her eyes to him, filled with tears. "You gave everything," she whispered. "Not for yourself, for me. No other would have done this. Only a human." He turned his head, weak but smiling. "That's what we do. We don't give up." For a long time, they lay in silence, the ruins behind them buried forever. Above them the sky stretched wide, endless, free. And in that light, the alien girl whispered the words she would never forget. "Humanity is more powerful than fear."